All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to today's Women in Leadership event. Welcome to everyone on the live stream and everyone here in Atlanta. I want to first start by thanking my amazing co-hosts, co-sponsors of this event, Keisha and Cindy. There's been a lot of behind-the-scenes work to make this happen, and so thank you to them. If we want to go to the next slide, I also want to thank we'll just keep going. The agenda, yada, yada. I think we lost a slide. Uh-oh. Can we go back? There's a thank you to our volunteers. There we go. Many of whom are in the room and at some of our sites around the country in North Carolina and up in Boston. So just thank you to everyone who's helped make this event possible today. Before we get started and before I introduce JJ, I wanted to give an update on some upcoming Women in Leadership events happening. So on the next slide, and this will come out in an email from WiL later this week, there are a couple of HBA events here in Atlanta coming up. Our mindfulness series continues. For those that have joined, I hope you found it really valuable. I think that 1 hour of just deep breathing has been really helpful. So the next one is on Monday, November 4th. And if you don't have the calendar invites, you can email the WiL inbox and we'll get them to you. And then in North Carolina, on November 7th, Iris Liv Friedrich will be joining a panel for Leading Lights, Women in Science Trailblazers. So if you're local in North Carolina, we really hope you'll join them there. And then finally, the HBA conference in November. I know a number of WiL members around the country at UCB will be joining, and more details will be coming out about a networking event there. So without further ado, we're going to get started. I'm going to introduce JJ. When we're done with the presentation here, we'll let you guys on the live stream know when we're going to cut things off. We're going to do some breakout sessions in the room, but please keep an eye on your email for a feedback survey because we really want to hear from you afterwards as well. So as we get started, today we're going to be talking about accelerating your impact and finding your voice. And I don't know if anyone saw the Wall Street Journal coverage of the Lean In McKinsey survey this week, but this is the 5th year they've been doing the Women in the Workplace study. And this year's headline was a little bit shocking to me. Men outnumber women 2-to-1 when reaching the first step on the manager level. And when we look about women accelerating and getting to leadership positions in the workplace, the breakdown is happening at that first managerial job. And that's why even as people are reaching CEO suites and executive teams and leadership levels, if we don't get more people up that first rung, we're never going to get more people to the top. So I just kind of give us that thought as we welcome JJ to talk about how we as individuals can accelerate our impact, how we together with our colleagues can accelerate our impact, and help us advocate for ourselves and for our colleagues to get up that ladder. So we are so excited to have JJ DiGeronimo here today. She's the president of Tech Savvy Women. She's been featured in numerous publications, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, Fox Business, and more. She's won multiple awards and has written several books, and we're thrilled to welcome her to UCB.
Thank you so much. You guys are so awesome. I am so excited to be here. I'm going to just get the clicker. I'm so excited to be here because I really feel like this is such an intimate topic for me. Being in tech, I've spent over 2 decades in tech, most of which in the Silicon Valley area. And I was so busy doing my day job, I really didn't think about how to work on my career because I was working in my career every day, long hours, traveling. And it wasn't until I really dedicated time to my second book that I really started to understand why are women showing up at these different levels or not more here or less here? And I feel like that's the stuff that I really love talking about. So hopefully this will be an engaging discussion. We can ask questions and really cover a lot of topics. I was just telling Allie in an hour, you know, I have 8.5 hours when I just read the book for Audibles a couple weeks ago. And so I definitely cannot cover all 8.5 hours, but if there's a particular topic you want to talk about, we can definitely do that. So I start the book off, and for those of you who don't have a book, I'll document the page number so that when you do get the book or you want to listen to Audibles, you'll know what page number. But I start the book off talking about TEDx. So when TEDx started, they hand-selected 10 men and 10 women to speak at their first TEDx. How many men said yes? Almost all 10, 9 of them. How many women?
4.
2. Now, if you heard me, I said they were hand-selected, meaning they were researched, they were thought of top of their class, they knew most of the data. And I think for many of us women, even sometimes when we are tapped on the shoulder, we can definitely talk ourselves out of doing things. And I think it's just a great place to start, because I think for many of us as women, we want to get better, we want to check all the boxes, we want to make sure that we're not going to let anybody down. And I think this was a big eye-opener for me, because I feel like so many women want to do amazing things, but we often talk ourselves out of it. And so today what I want to share with you is some of the research that I found that was quite eye-opening, but also some tools, techniques, ways to think about it for yourself, maybe people on your team, maybe if you have daughters or nieces, maybe if you have friends that are thinking about what are they going to do next, you can share some of this data. Because for me, I feel like until we can really understand sort of the things that are working with us and against us, it's hard to gain that momentum. So that's what I hope to talk about today. Some of the other things that I think are important is I named it Accelerate Your Impact because the book was initially going to be a networking book, because women are fantastic at networking at the level they're at. We're very good at that. But networking one layer up or two layers up is often challenging for us because we don't want to waste people's time. We want to make sure we have the right things to say. And so my research really started with the networking component of it. But then through that research, I found that not only are we not really great at networking up, but we don't have a lot of sponsors, and we're not talking about our accomplishments in a way that makes us be seen based on where we want to have impact next. And so I could have named it a lot of things like how to make your next level or how to get to your next level, how to get promoted, how to get on a board. All of these things are covered in the book. But I thought impact was really interesting because what I find with women is that we all have something we desire to do beyond what we're doing now. And how do you really unfold that for yourself? And so that's what we'll talk about today. So one thing I love about these is just the getting together. I think women coming together, talking about their goals, challenges, opportunities is really so exciting. And I think this was highlighted in Harvard Business Review, is that there's a lot of power in these groups. And so if you're online or if you're here in person, making sure that you partner up with somebody or get to meet someone for coffee. I have a lot of women that are now reaching out to people for 15-minute phone calls. Since your company and your work is global, it's not always easy to be in the same place to have in-person meetings, but with Zoom and GoToMeeting and even some of the other technologies, you can get together for a 15-minute call just to understand, what are you doing? How did you get there? What do you hope to do next? I think many of us have to have these accountability partners, which I keep hearing a lot about. I think they're super helpful, especially if you have a big initiative that you're trying to reach in the next 12 to 24 months. So some of you asked me, how did I start this? So I told you, I ended up getting into computers, not because I loved to code, but because I ended up working a lot of minimum wage jobs from the time I was 15. And by the time I was able to go to college, which I didn't even really, when we went to college, there was no college visits. I mean, for some of you who are younger, it was like, fill out an application with your guidance counselor and good luck. Some of you are more fortunate. I was not, but I ended up getting into a school in New York, and then my dad came back and said, this isn't going to work. Too expensive. You have to find another school, which would have been nice to know because it was like April of my senior year. So he ended up finding this school for me, my guidance counselor in Ohio. And so when I arrived, that was checking in. I never visited. I didn't even know really where in Ohio it was when I applied. But when I got there, they said, what type of job do you want to do? What type of degree? And I was just thinking like, well, I don't want to make minimum wage anymore. That is not very fun. I want to do something that's going to get hired. So when I asked a couple of the counselors, they said, well, everybody gets hired out of these computer programs. I'm like, well, that's what I'm going to do then. And that started my journey in computers. I was horrible. I'm dyslexic. I'm a horrible coder. But I muddled through it because I had my sights set on the goal of having a real job. And being on a plane, I had really big desires to move and travel and see the world. So I'm happy to say my first job was in Atlanta. I had originally gotten a job at JCPenney's data center in Dallas. But then I got interviewed by Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture, and they put me downtown. And I said, I don't even care what I have to do. I'm going to take this job. So I got the job, and I started my career in Atlanta, and I spent about 7 years here. And it was fantastic. I traveled the world. I got to see a lot of different data centers and worked on a lot of networks, and it was fantastic. But then you start to move through your life. You move into your 30s and beyond. And I don't know if any of you have tried to date in Atlanta, but enough said. Okay, right. So this great man from Ohio that I had met years ago crossed my path again. He's like, hey, you should come up to Ohio and hang out with me. And I'm like, oh, that would be great. So a couple weekends, evolved. Then all of a sudden I'm living in the suburbs in Ohio. And I'm working in tech still. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of women in tech in Ohio, or at least they never left their offices. All the CIO events, all the conferences, men. And so one of my personal goals was to get more women out. And so I started inviting my women customers, my women partners, and little by little we would just meet for wine one time a quarter. And this is just one of our first events for tech-savvy women, but we grew it into meeting more quarterly. We ended up starting women's groups not only in Ohio, but I was also asked to start the women's group for my tech job out in Silicon Valley. And so I really had access to just some amazing women. And so many of us had stories and goals and tips and tricks that I started to write things down. Because I was like, you know what, I have to share this with my daughter. Because at the time, she was only 3. And I knew that this having it all of having a job and having children and traveling, and I don't know about you guys, but I thought it was really hard. But every magazine was like, oh, you can do it. You can do it. I'm like, this is not working for me. I cannot do it. I was crying through airports. I was missing plays. I was missing, trying to find someone to do cover. Do you know how hard it is to get a babysitter to make a 7 a.m. flight? Yes, it's so hard. And so I was asking women 5, 10, 15 years ahead of me, how did you do this? What is working? What is not? And through those discussions, I started to just document. And I think sometimes when you put yourself in the universe in a new way, the universe starts to deliver for you people to help you sort of usher your project along. You guys know this? This is true. And so I was holding a women's event, and a woman reached out to me and said, there's this woman, she needs some tech help, she's doing yoga online, she needs to come to your conference. So I said, let me talk to her. So I just talked to her on the phone, and she showed up at the conference, and I gave her the platform, and she asked her some web development help. She actually was a wonderful woman. She was deaf and was doing yoga online for people who could not leave their home, which I thought was so awesome. And so she used the platform, she got some web service help, someone helped host her, and it really took her business to the next level. And so as she was leaving the conference, she said, oh my gosh, this was so great. Is there anything I can do to help you? And I'm like, no, I'm just so happy you could find the help. And as she's walking away, how sometimes the universe just you start to say something, you're like, oh my gosh, where did that come? I go, I'm writing a book. If you know an editor, I'd love that. And I'm sitting there going, where did that come from? I was like, she looks back, smiles. I'm like, yeah, okay. So she's like, yeah, I don't really know anybody, but I'll stay in touch. I'm like, okay, great, because that wasn't even my question, but see you later. So a few weeks later, she called me back. She's like, I have the perfect person for you. I really was like, really? She's like, yeah. She's like, I met this woman, Deb Burke. She can completely help you. Now, I didn't know at the time, because I really didn't know anybody who wrote a book, that you interview multiple editors. But I really didn't know that. So I talked to Deb on the phone. She was fabulous. She was about 65 years old. She had been through so much more of women in the workplace than I had been in. And so I would write chapters and send them to her. And she's like, oh, you have to think about this and you have to think about that. And she was such a gift. And I really feel like it was the universe's gift to me at the time to sort of help me get the word out there. And so that was really the journey of my first book, The Working Woman's GPS. And I never thought I would write a book. I mean, I am horrible at grammar, horrible. But I think sometimes, even if you're horrible at something, but you have a story, there's a will, there's a way. It just sort of gets out there. And I really didn't even market my first book because I had a full-time job, and I didn't want my job that I worked for to think I wasn't taking my job seriously. I was a global director for a company out of Silicon Valley. I was traveling the world, and I just published my book sort of under the radar. I never marketed it. I barely ever talked about it because I didn't want to get fired, and I definitely didn't want my company to think I wasn't taking my job seriously. Huge mistake. I could have leveraged that as a great opportunity to help my company, help my business, but I didn't have the self-confidence as an author at the time to even make that part of my discussion. But little by little, I was invited to go to speak at women's events, and it was for partners like Cisco and HP and IBM, people that were already in my network. And it was fascinating because I found that so many women that would come to these events would ask questions: how do I get promoted? How do I find a sponsor? How do I get out underneath this particular group? How do I change P&Ls? How do I get on boards? and I would just start documenting all the questions that I would get from these women. And it was so obvious that nobody really gave us the tip sheet. Everyone says, go to school, get a job, do a great job in the job you're at, then you're gonna get promoted and you'll get these opportunities, which sometimes in your 20s happens quite a bit. But in my experience, after the age of 35, you don't get promoted as often. You don't get as many opportunities because there's not as many opportunities to go to, and you have to be a lot more strategic. And I think that's the part that we don't hear a lot about, is what is the strategy to increase your impact? And that's really what I want to focus on today. So as you're sitting here thinking, think about, where do you want to have more influence and impact? What is calling you? And this might be at work, but I go to a lot of conference rooms where women are very happy in the role they're in, but they want to do something in their community or something at the local school, or they want to get on a board. How many of you are on a board already? That's awesome. Anyone else? Do you like your experiences on boards? You have a board meeting this afternoon. And can I ask you how you got on the board, if you don't mind sharing? Because I think I have a whole chapter on this. I think it's fascinating.
So I'm on 2 boards. The one I'm going to this afternoon, I started working with the Cobb County Chamber, their workforce development team for healthcare. And then they connected, someone there from UCB recommended me, and then they connected me to the Marietta High School and the Marietta City Schools, which is just it's a smaller school district within Marietta. And I started, going to board meetings and meeting people there. And then they said, we're starting putting together funding for a college and career academy. We like industry representation.
Oh, that's so nice.
Because we want to know, and we brought students here, and I hosted that. So then got into that, and then we got funding. We got the $4 million grant, or how much it was, like $4 million.
Wow.
And then from there, they were like, okay, would you like to be on, we'd love for you to be on the board.
That is
The governance
fantastic.
board. So
That's fantastic. And do you get other leadership skills and work skills in those board roles? That's what I've heard that quite a bit. Do either want to share about the boards? You don't have to, no pressure, but do you want to share about the boards you're on?
Sure, I can't compare it to Stephanie.
But just,
it's not a competition.
how do you?
We're selling together, Keisha.
That's right. But really, how did you get on the board? Because I think that's the thing that none of us really, we need to discuss that more.
Yeah, I think mine came through just my relationships that I've been able to build here at UCB. I'm on the D&I board, Diversity and Inclusion board for Georgia. So working with other organizations in the state on diversity and inclusion.
That's
so
amazing.
I think it really just came from the relationships that I've built, and I was asked to join that board. And then I'm also a part of my HOA board at
That's great.
my homeowners association.
I know that's a good board to be on.
So I am in charge of the agriculture, I guess.
Oh, nice.
Yes. So the flowers.
Warming.
And,
Yeah. That's nice. Do you want to say here?
Same thing. I was asked to be on the board. I'm on a breast cancer awareness board. It's
That's
called Caring and Sharing. It's whenever I was calling on a lot of these physicians, I was asked to be on this board because at the time I had a product in which I sold. And they asked me to come and help these women, and we cater to women that are in underserved communities and making sure that everyone gets to have mammograms done yearly. We do educational type opportunities such as that. So I was asked to be on this board as a result of all of that.
I love that. Anyone else want to share that's on? Anyone online that's online that wants to share, you can use the chat box. But what I love about boards is, one, it gets you a network you don't already have, and sometimes experience. Experience you might not be getting in your day job. Say you want to expand yourself in a particular area. So I'm on a couple boards, and generally they would put me on diversity, but I often stretch sometimes to be, so I'm on a board of a VC in Cleveland, and they asked me if I would be on the marketing or the DI board, which would make a lot of sense based on what I do in my day job. I said, oh, that's so nice. But what I'd like to do is be on the investment board. They're like, the investment board? You don't have any investment experience. I'm like, ding, ding, ding. Exactly. Like, if I'm going to give my time, I want to learn something in exchange. And so I'm on this investment board with all these lawyers and bankers, which is incredibly intimidating. I barely said anything the first couple meetings. But what I have learned on the investment board is the bankers and the lawyers have never sold product. So they know nothing about reaching the right people. They know nothing about landing and expanding. They know nothing about how to onboard, similar spend or getting people to do cooperations or partnerships or affiliation. They think I'm brilliant. I'm like, this is so great. And here I'm so scared to talk. But honestly, sometimes putting yourself in a situation where you're there to learn, you might have a lot more to offer. So in the book, I have a whole chapter on how to get on boards, because I thought, and I have a lot of these I thought you got tapped on the shoulder. But there's about 9 interviews in the board chapter, 8 of which were not tapped on the shoulder. They started in a committee, they reached out to the executive director, they found interest in what they were doing, and then they slowly but surely got more aware of not only the organization, but maybe a particular initiative, did some work, and then let the board members know they were interested in being on the board. And some of it took 36 months to actually get an opportunity to interview for the board. But most people are not tapped on the shoulder, which I thought was shocking. I thought once you got to a certain level in your career, all of a sudden you're board ready. Not the case at all. So an FYI, and for those of you that are on boards, you should really think about getting on for-profit boards. Because here's the beauty of for-profit boards. They pay you. Nonprofit, you're just doing a lot of work, which all of us, if there's a passion project or an organization, it's wonderful to give back and do that. And some boards here in town, like some of the ones in my town, or I'll think of Chicago, like the aquarium board in Chicago. Some of the big boards, you can meet just almost anybody you want in the city because they have boards of 50, 60 people on there, and they're often well-to-do. So if that's something of interest to you, there's a whole chapter here on the boards. So really think about for yourself, where do you want to have more influence and impact? What is something you want to throw your energy at in the next 12 to 24 months? And we did put questionnaires on the table, or little handouts that look like this. And I like to do this because most folks are in different places in their career. Some people are retiring, some people are just starting their career. So I definitely keep this open-ended for you to fill out. And this you just take with you. And so the first question, I don't know if they have it online, but the first question is, list a few areas in which you would like to have more influence and impact in the next 12 to 24 months. This is something you can come back to throughout the time we're here together. So how many of you wrote that down and then thought of some reason you can't do it? You just can nod or smile. Yeah, this is normal. This is normal. I come up with ideas or suggestions, and and even when I'm talking to women on the phone, it's amazing. They'll tell me something they want to do, and before I even get to respond, they'll start telling me the list of reasons they can't do it. And it's amazing. I never knew that all of us had this self-talk until I actually started taking mindfulness classes about 36 months ago. So are any of you doing the mindfulness or have done mindfulness? Is that not just fascinating how much our mind talks? And it's never positive. It's never supportive, like, yes, you can. It's like, who do you think you are? I mean, you cannot do that. No way. I mean, I have this self-chatter that I would love to say is super positive, but it constantly tells me all the things I can't do and how ridiculous I am. You guys have this? I know I'm not alone? Yes. I thought this was just me. I didn't realize until I went to mindfulness how common this is, and how the mindfulness I thought was so important because it actually gives you a little space between yourself and that voice, and so you can recognize that that is talking to you nonstop, and you have the ability to say, appreciate the input, but don't need it. Thank you very much. I did this, I was just telling a few people here, I started these retreats for women. I thought about it for about 2.5 years before I did anything about it. And every time I would think about doing it, I would convince myself how ridiculous the idea was, who did I think I was, who would even come. You know, I would just continue to talk to myself about this. And I finally had a coach that basically said, why do you keep waiting? I'm like, I don't know what to do. And she's like, well, build what you want to go to. I thought that was, for me, that was just gold. I was like, build what I want to go to. Because then there's no guesswork. It's something I'm building, I want to go to. She says the energy and frequency you create based on what you want to do will attract the right energy and frequency your way. And for me, that advice was so freeing, because honestly, when I want to start something or do something, and I have this all the time where I'm constantly convincing myself that I'm not ready or I can't do it, and I'm happy to know that I'm not alone. Because every room I go to with a bunch of women, they're like, yes, I talk myself out of things all the time. And if some of us are lucky to have people in our life, if we don't talk us out, we have these other people in our life that talk us out of it. Yes, in my first book, I talk about this energy exchange, what energy are you surrounding yourself with? And are you with people that are uplifting and supporting not only where you are, but where you want to go? Or are they trying to take you with them, which might not be in a direction you desire to go? And how are you going to manage that moving forward? So I'm happy to know that I am not alone. I was happy to notice this is an older article, but I love it because it has Sheryl Sandberg, it has Meryl Streep. So all these people that I think are amazing also have this self-talk. And I think when I came across this in my research, it was so refreshing to know that people that are at the top of their game still have this conversation happening in their head. And I think it's so freeing because now I'm like, well, that conversation is always going to happen no matter where I am in my journey. But having the mindfulness skills to be able to compartmentalize it is so helpful. So if you're not already doing mindfulness at some level, I'm telling you, it was a game changer for me because it really gave me the ability to compartmentalize that negative self-talk so that I could get on with my life. Because it's based on fear. It just, oh gosh, what if? And there's so many things we need to be doing in the world, especially as women, that we cannot be funneling around in our head. Can we, can't we, can we? Like, believe me, how many of you are in sales? Yeah, I mean, people who are in sales or have been in sales, no is such a common thing people say to you that it actually is a great job because you hear it so much you don't even think of it. You're like, well, that's just no, not now. That's not really no. And I think that sales job has helped me because it really pushes me to say, well, go after it again or go in the window or go through the back door, whatever way you need to get there. So I think for you, just write down what you think your fear is associated to whatever you put with where you want to have influence. What is your biggest fear? What is the worst thing that could happen to you? So you'll say, this is on page 45, and in the bottom there, those are all the page numbers of the content that I'm referencing. So this right here is on page 45. And it's great because it has a chart there too that talks a lot about self-esteem and self-efficacy. So self-esteem is how you feel about yourself or about a particular situation. Confidence is how you act based on how you feel. And self-efficacy is a learned. So self-efficacy is learned. Self-efficacy is having a vision for where you want to go and believing you can achieve it. And the more you take chances, the more you're not 100% ready, the more you will build your self-efficacy. And so taking opportunities before you're 100% prepared is actually really good for you to sort of prove to yourself that you can get it across the finish line. And so on page 44, there's Marissa Levine, for people on the phone, Marissa Levine has a chart where she talks about the 3 pillars of leadership and confidence. And it's really awesome because you'll meet a lot of different people in the corporate world that sit in these different boxes, including yourself. And I do get a lot of chit chat about people in corporate supporting each other. I'm just gonna be honest, I'm gonna just put it out there right now. About women supporting women. This is a big topic that comes up almost every city I'm in, any state. And I think for many of us, I always even tell my daughter, like I said, she's 13, is, you know, when girls are not nice to you, it's not because they don't like you. It's because they don't like themselves. They're challenged themselves, and they're afraid that you might get something that they don't have. And so it's not, you know, as difficult as it is sometimes to have people that don't support you or undermine you or move around you, I have learned through this research, this study, my mindfulness practice, to really just give out love. Because I am secure enough in myself to know now that I'm going to get it across the finish line with or without help in all instances. But that's not always the case for all the people that may be trying to undermine you. And they need your love and their own love more than anything. And so if you come across these situations, it's easy to get mad and go home and talk to your friend about it or somebody at home about it, but all it's doing is dragging your energy down. And so leaving that at the conversation when you interact with them, and as you're leaving the conversation, like, my heart sees your heart, I'm sending you love, and I hope that you get the self-esteem and confidence you need to go where you want to go in life. And I think that has brought me a lot of inner peace, rather than what I used to do, which is drag it out in my head for hours after the situation. And this happens no matter if you're man, woman, I mean, we all are struggling with this. And depending on how much experience we have in a particular role or a particular project or with a particular product or customer, we might jump around in this chart several times in a day, which could be exhausting. So the other thing I want to point out is on page 147. Yeah, 147. So 147, and for those of you online, you can look up the fear chart with my name. I collected all these fears from women. And I'm sure some of you will see yourself in some of these fears, and I'll give you a minute to look at it. But I think, well, I'll give you a minute to just take a look at it. For those on the phone, I'll just read a couple of them. My ideas have been overlooked in the past meetings. I do not want to offer up other ideas for the fear of blank. A position was posted that I was interested in, but I did not think I would be considered. I have been asked to present at a meeting or a conference, but I think others would do a better job. And so there's several I've collected through all the conversations I've had. And then I have two charts. Yes, fear held me back, or I was fearful, but I pushed forward. And so whatever your fear is, if it's not on the chart for you, just think about as you go into the next week or so, kind of monitor how you feel about yourself. Like, do I feel mighty going into this? Or do I feel disengaged? Or do I feel powerless? Like, whatever it is for you, I think the beauty of being present of how you feel when you go into different things can empower you to not only align to the right things, but really start to investigate why you might feel one way or another as you're approaching new things. And that self-awareness is so powerful. It's so powerful. And if you're mentoring people or sponsoring other people, it's great to talk to them about their fears and give them tools. So that's an option too. All right, so we're going to dive a little bit into where you want to have more influence and impact. And I didn't really realize this, but when I was in my job, my last job before I started doing this full time, I was hired as a sales rep because the folks that hired me had worked with me previously. And through the interview process, I sort of implied that I was 6 months pregnant. And that I didn't really want to get back on the road. Although I'd been on the road for about 13 years, I really needed a local job because I wasn't really sure how I was going to handle all this. And even though I thought I was invincible, which I'm not, I said, I'd love a local job. So they said, fine, you can do sales, which was the most insightful job I've ever had because I've always been on the expert side or engineering side or in the data center. Now I'm out pushing products, and I didn't realize really the connotation that salespeople have. It's really an uphill battle in a lot of ways. But I did that about 4.5 years, and it was an experience of a lifetime. I've learned so many of my key life lessons in having a sales job. But after 4.5 years, I wanted to start go into this new product line, which you might have heard of in tech. It's called cloud computing. But in 2008, it was just starting. I mean, it wasn't even out there in 2008. So I raised my hand to go on to under this new P&L. And it was so interesting because it was about 36 at the time, 37. And I raised my hand, and they're like, oh, that's so nice. So nice you're interested, but not really. This isn't the role for you. Now, when women raise their hand for a role, they've really thought about it usually. They've looked at the job descriptions, they've talked to some people. So I was like, gosh, I really want this job. And they're like, no. What I realized is that most of the people that were making decisions either didn't know who I was, didn't know my experience, and only saw me in the role that I was in now, not the last 15 years of my career. And so relevance became such a big part of it. I wasn't relevant based on where I wanted to have impact and influence next. And I didn't really think about that, because in your 20s, a lot of times you get kind of moved along, but in your 30s, like I said, 30, 35, it's tough competition, and you have to help bridge from where you are to where you want to go. You can't assume other people just know who you are and what you have to offer and why you would be a good fit for that particular level of impact. And so after getting upset, maybe shedding a few tears, I spent a time just really figuring out, what do I have to do to increase my relevance for that particular role? And so these are just some of the things that I did. And honestly, it's really a lot of the stories and things that I've collected here are how people have bridged the gap from where they are to where they want to go. Because for many of us, it doesn't just happen. You don't just get tapped on the shoulder. You really need to enhance your brand, expand your network, find the right sponsors, and that really is the backbone for this. And so whether you're doing it yourself, you're mentoring someone else, there's tips and tricks and all of that, and so I'll cover some of those things. So for those of you, I'm not going to read your slides, but I'm just going to go through these, and if somebody has any questions, we can definitely review those. Because I'm assuming that if you actually wrote it down on your paper, you've been thinking about it for a while. Maybe some of you have already tried to open that door or have paved that path, and maybe it hasn't worked. Maybe some of you have just been thinking about it and haven't done anything yet about it. But I think just really thinking about, how do I need to show up? How do people need to see me for me to actually be able to move in that direction? So one of the things that I did is I actually used LinkedIn, which I think is a fascinating tool, even when you're not trying to get a job, if you just want to see what other people have done in their careers. And so I went out and I researched all the people that had cloud jobs in 2008, which weren't that many in 2008, 11 years ago, so not that many. So I would just find, who's already doing the job or on the board or started something in a, some people come to me and say, oh, I'm trying to start a STEM program in my school. Who's already doing it? What's out there? What programs can you use? Do you have to create content? What steps did they have to take to get there? And I made myself a spreadsheet. So I said, okay, I can do this, I can't do that. So I can write a presentation. I really don't have time to get a PhD. So be realistic. Be realistic with yourself. Okay? And for many of us too, LinkedIn is such a powerful tool because there's so many awesome groups out there. You can learn so much. Even when I was writing my first book, as I mentioned, I didn't really know anybody that had written a book before. So I joined 7 groups on LinkedIn. We're about publishing books, your first author, authors with multiple books, and I would just watch the feeds. And then I reached out, after I'd watched the feeds for a while, I would reach out to some folks that would post often and say, hey, I really like your advice. Can I ask you a question about X? I couldn't believe all the people are like, sure, call me at this time. I had talked to 4 or 5 people, 3 or 4 I've actually met in person since then. So LinkedIn makes it very accessible to reach out to people that are in parallel roles, parallel opportunities, on boards, in the executive levels of your organization. And believe me, they're checking you out too. So if you're going to go into a meeting you haven't been in, or maybe you're being considered for a group or some initiative, a lot of times they check out your LinkedIn and what have you been doing? What haven't you been doing? Why would you be a good fit? Boards always do this too. I've been on many boards. And so really thinking about, how can you uniquely position yourself? What additional skills can you have? Can you speak at a conference? Can you write articles? Can you reach out to people for coffee? What can you do to really close the gap for yourself to make your influence and impact goals a reality? And I have several charts in here to kind of go through certain things about what you can do and who you can meet with. So I'll show those to you. Okay. So one of the things I love is when I talk about this, many women are like, are you crazy, JJ? I am already up till 2 in the morning. Do not have time to research people that are where I want to be. This is crazy. So I can hear you. I know what this is. And in fact, when I wrote my first book, a lot of women that were 10, and men that were 10, 15, 20 years ahead of me, they said, protect your schedule. Only align to things that matter to you. Don't be going to too much too fast. Say no when you can, which I have read those books, right? Have you read those books like The 4-Hour Work Week and The Power of Now and, Be the Best Worker, be all these leadership books, but I still have a hard time making it work for me. And so Deb, I told you earlier about Deb Burke, the editor. I was telling her about these charts. I'm like, well, in my head, I'm like, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And she's like, I don't know what that means, JJ. You need to write it down. So one night, I put these charts together. And this chart has been the #1 chart since I started. And this chart really helps you create some space in your schedule. So the first column is commitments, and it's also on page 65. So the first column is commitments, and this is everything you've already said yes to. Now, when I started carrying this chart around with me, I just printed it out in an Excel spreadsheet. I had one piece of paper. I ended with 8 sheets of paper after 30 days. I had said yes to so many things I didn't even know I said yes to. Emails came in, people slid by my office, a text, can you do this, can you do this? I was saying yes, 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 yes. Never thinking like, is this a good use of my time? Do I have time for this? Who else is involved? So I think just getting a handle on what are all the things you're saying yes to. And then I added this column after my first book because I had some repeat offenders. Yes. So who's asking you to do this? It could be you, but it could be people in your lives. I think I don't need to say anything else. So just put their name, right by the commitment. No ill will. Remember, keeping your energy high, no ill will. All right, the next column is, does this align to where I am now? So this is a yes, no. Does it align to where I am now or where I want to have influence and impact next? This is important because for women, we say yes a lot of times because we want to be liked. We don't want to feel guilty. We want to prove that we can do it. And we're taking on things that may not be necessary for us to take on. And so thinking long and hard about how are you spending your time each week? And is it allowing you to gain momentum on things that are important to you? And ultimately, I have buckets for my family. I have buckets for my personal, things I like to do personally and in my community. I have buckets for work. And so the alignment thing, you could have lots of different things and even creating different charts. The next one is energy. And energy is so important because it's, do I look forward to doing this commitment or is it draining me? So again, a yes-no column. Is it something I look forward to doing or is it something I'd rather not be doing at all? And if you're not sure, you could just put a slash. You could be like, I got to think about this. Because what I have found are things that you're not looking forward to doing could take 10 times longer to do because you continuously put them off because you don't want to do them. So are there things you can outsource? Are there things you can get off your plate? Now, there's going to be jobs you have where there's things inside the job you're just going to have to get done. That happens. But can you figure out a way to do less of it? Can you get an intern? Is there someone on your team that maybe hasn't had that experience that would give them a new skill set? What are other things? And so just keeping track of this is important. The thing I like about this column is so awesome because it gives you insight to your natural talents. People are like, oh, just get in line with who you are and what your skill set is. You're like, okay, great. What the heck does that mean? This really gives you insight because it's like, I found out for the commitments, I love to speak. I love to write. I love to bring new people together. So on my commitments, I started to see some threads that showed me what were my natural talents. And then by knowing what my natural talents, then I can pick roles and opportunities that are going to leverage things I do naturally well already so that I can increase the energy I have in my life. And I think for many of us and many people I meet, especially ones that are, I meet different women at different times and even men that are just, sometimes they're just down and out. I'm like, well, tell me how you spend your day, tell me. And they think I'm crazy. I don't really care how they spend their day. I'm just trying to listen to see what are they aligning their time to? Because if you're saying yes to everyone because you're just trying to make people happy, but it's not really aligning to things that matter to you, you're not going to show up the way you want to show up. Not for yourself, not for the family members, not for people at work. And so being really selective on where you spend your time is half the trick of really creating more relevance, but also creating more momentum. And I'm a big believer in doing less but achieving more. So doing less things that you really don't want to do and align yourself to the things you do want to do. And this takes time. This is not something, don't be calling people, well, I saw this woman and I don't want to do that crap anymore. Don't do that this afternoon. This takes time. Yes. Yes.
There's I don't know. Oh,
yes.
Yes. What if there's a conflict between the alignment and the energy? Because there are so a lot of stuff sometimes I know I love to do because it goes, it is my something I enjoy and
Passion
I'm very good
project.
at it.
Yes.
But it's not necessarily aligned to, I'm fully aware it's not aligned to my goals.
But does it give you energy that makes your goal, like that helps you carry energy into the other stuff you're doing?
It does actually, yes.
Yes, that's a great question, because I feel like you have to have your passion projects, whether you have a green thumb or you like to go do something special on Sundays, like if it gives you energy that carries you through to get, because you're going to have stuff on your list that you don't like doing. I mean, that's just the reality, but you have to have enough juice in the tank that gets you to push through to the other side. And so having time for passion projects is awesome, and women are notorious for taking things they love out of their schedule. So I'm giving you permission to put things you love back in your schedule. And a couple like different women that I've met, they do things for their siblings, they do things for their parents, or like the one woman 3 years ago, she was an accountant, she was doing the books for her brother's apartment complex. Every weekend she said she was going to do it. Every weekend it didn't get done. The last weekend of the month, she's up at 10 o'clock at night starting the project. She's like, I'm not doing that anymore because it ruins every single weekend for me. Like, I'm trying to help him, but it's draining me dry and it's ruining my weekends. And so she's like, I'm going to pay for someone else to do it for the next few months until he can afford to do it because I'm not going to do it anymore. It's draining me. And so just being selective of what you say yes to is really important. And it gives you sometimes some room and momentum for the energy. Because I really, after all this work and research I've done, life is about exchanging energy. It really is. And that's what it comes down to, is how do you feel about yourself? How do you make other people feel, and everything in between? And all this other stuff is just a distraction in a lot of ways. And so if you're feeling down and out, or if you're feeling like you don't have the energy you want, you have complete control to adjust your schedule. And I'm empowering you to do so, because people want you to be the best. People who love you want you to be the best version of yourself. So even if they don't love the initial, like, hey, I'm not gonna fill in the blank anymore, it might take a couple times. And if you have a situation at work where and I'll talk about this, if you have a situation at work where you're just under, like it's constantly, I don't think I have it. If it's, you have all the things you're doing, you're continuing, sometimes you work for 2 bosses at a time, if you had that joy. That's a joy. Writing on your whiteboard, or even having a weekly report of all the things you're working on, what the impact is, and I have a project chart I can show you later, is really helpful, because oftentimes the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing, the left hand forgot what they asked you last week, and you're working around the clock. And so I had a boss like this that I was intimidated by, and so one of the things I did is I wrote everything down, and then when he would come in and ask for something else, I said, I can absolutely do that. What here on the list can we move around? Because as it sits today, all these are hitting in the same quarter. So if you want me to bring this up, something has to come down. And he would look at my list, because it was on my whiteboard with his little readers like this. And he'd say, well, what is this? And I'm like, well, that's what we talked about last week when I was here in California. He's like, oh, yeah, we don't need to do that. He'd be like, what is this? I'm like, da-da-da-da. I would tell him, he's like, oh, yeah, we can push that out. So making sure the people that you work for know all the projects you have in flux or you're working on is important, because sometimes life gets busy, they get busy, they forget, or things change, and the information does not dribble down. So if you don't do a weekly report or something that sort of lets people know what you're doing, it might be a good idea. And it's also a good idea for you if you have to do annual reviews or 360s, or you have to do any leadership, that you keep track of the projects you're working on so that you can go back to those notes rather than trying to figure out at 11 o'clock at night, okay, what did I do this year? What did I do? Right, okay. So time, how much time is your yes taking you? So could be 20 minutes, could be 2 hours, could be 2 weeks. So making sure you know. And I talk about, I don't put it in the book, but there's a nonprofit which I love. They empower women entrepreneurs. The woman contacted me to mentor the women entrepreneurs, which I love. It's definitely a high energy for me. It aligns to what's important to me. But she wanted to meet with me. She wanted me to meet with every woman. 12 women twice a year, so 24 women in person. So my little chart here that I do in my head now, I'm like, that's like 75 hours. So hour to get there, get set up, meet with them, follow up on an email, take a conference call, set it up, whatever it is, about 3 hours a person. That is way too much of me to give to something. So I said, well, let me think about it. So I take 24 hours to think about it. I called Rika, that was a woman's name that ran the program. I said, hey, I noticed you do these monthly get-togethers. She said, yeah. I said, what if I come to one of these monthly get-togethers? We can send some things out in advance. I can show up, and I'll stay after for anyone who wants to talk. She's like, yeah, that's great. That would be perfect. I just swapped a 75-hour ask into like 4 or 5 hours. So sometimes the way things are given to you does not need to be the way that you accept them. So making sure you understand what else you have in play so that you can make sure that it's the right amount of time. And then the last column is remove. Just, as you go through this chart, and I suggest you just bring it with you over a month. If you really want to find more time in your schedule, write everything down. Should I remove this? Can I get this off my calendar in 2020? Just really think about it. Because I think for many of us, we want to have more impact, but our current schedule is weighing us down. So a couple things I think about, which I'll show you the page number 2, but I'm just going to pop through these. I2 is your influence and impact goals. This is great for community things. Like, what is the budget? What is the budget? I always ask that now. And everyone gets uncomfortable at the table, but like, put it out there in sales. Right now, I'm not afraid to ask questions that I was afraid to ask pre-sales. So these are things you can ask yourself. And I think it's important because it validates that for you that you prioritize and respect your own schedule and making sure you're aligning to the right things. And I think it's super helpful, especially if you have a desire to have more influence and impact. Oftentimes you do have to create a bridge for yourself. You do have to increase your relevance. But you can only do that if you have time in your schedule to do that. And so really thinking about what do you have. So just to show of hands, maybe they could do this in the chat box for those of listening. Maybe 1 is yes and 2 is no. So how many? Can some of you remove things off your list? Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. It'll make you happier too, and it's a little uncomfortable. I'm going to admit, it's really uncomfortable at first. I would not pick your biggest thing off your list to take off first. I have learned, take small things off your list. I do not like making brownies for school activities. I just don't. That's not my thing. But I can set up Evite. I can set up PayPal or Square. That's something I can do so easily. I like to do it. So now for nonprofit event stuff, I often take the tech part of it. I set up their nonprofit or their donation page because that's super easy. I do not like making brownies. So I have not made brownies in 2 years. Super happy about this. So just think about what do you like to do, and when people ask you if it's, can you find other ways to do it? How about the chat? Is anyone responding? No? That's all right. We know you have some yeses there. Okay, so some of the things I want to share with you in the time we have together here is some of the things that I thought were surprising. So this wasn't as surprising, right? That women have a hard time sharing their accomplishments. But the reality is if you're not letting other people know what you're accomplishing, it's very hard for them to represent you in rooms that you're not invited to. That's really what it comes down to. And unfortunately, one of the things that I think for women is we've been taught at an early age is not to brag. Don't share your accomplishments. People will figure it out. I'm here to say they may not figure it out. Okay, so you have to be able to promote your successes. And even if it's just, a little bit here and there of, hey, I worked on this project, this is what we were able to do in this amount of time, these are the new customers we brought on. Anytime you can present your own data, you should definitely ask to present your own data if you can, just from brand awareness. But I often talk to women on page 41 about accomplishments, what are you doing now, what do you want to do next? I'm not a huge believer that you should be running around saying your elevator speech everywhere. I'm not a big believer, but if you have an opportunity in an elevator, or you'll have holiday parties or something, and you have the opportunity to share a nugget, you should do it. Because I'll tell you, and most of my sponsors have been men, but definitely with everything that's going on right now, men are more intimidated than ever to bring up any types of conversation. So they will ask you about your children, your last vacation, something, just all, because they don't know what to ask sometimes. So make it easy. Be like, hey, did you know I was working on this project? Or did you know this customer signed this? Or this product got this much momentum? Whatever it is, make sure that you have a couple nuggets in your back pocket that you can share. So that's definitely important to do. I have this babysitter I was just thinking of, my Emily, and she's been a babysitter for me, so she's been around me for a long time, and she's working at a very large organization that happens to make planes. And she was in the cafeteria. She's been there for about 8 or 9 months. She was in the cafeteria, and a senior executive came by her table and said, hey, I saw you in the new hire a couple months ago. How did it go? She said, oh, it's going great. She's like, I really think I should get a commission for all the money I'm saving your company. And he's like, oh, really? Why? She's like, yeah, well, actually, I've done this, this, and this. And she spouted out some numbers. She's in the procurement department, and she's been going through all their old contracts, and she's had some significant savings. So she called me later that evening. She's like, oh my gosh, I'm either going to get fired or promoted. I'm not sure. Nothing happened. A couple weeks later, came by, and she got invited to go to his office. And she was like, oh my gosh. So she goes to the office, and he said, hey, I looked in some of the work you're doing, and I want to give you a raise. She's like 25. Yeah, I was like, you're taking this way too seriously. I can't even believe you had the guts to do that. But I just think, like, here she just had a couple data points that she had it in your pocket. So I know I didn't do this as often as I should have. And if I could suggest just have a few data points, try to keep, if you have this small window of opportunity, try to share some nuggets to talk about what you're pushing across the finish line, okay? Because the reality is women are measured more on what they've accomplished, where men are measured more on what is possible. And so we're not even starting with apples to apples. So you have to be able to self-promote when the time is right. When the time is right. And don't be afraid to ask other people to self-promote for you, because there's people in rooms that you're not invited to, and if you have a friend or somebody on your team that can say, hey, can you just share this when it makes sense? Yes?
So,
yeah.
I like that. But how do you do that?
What part?
The part around asking others to advocate for you.
Yes.
Like, how do you do that casually and not come off as, what is she asking? She wants me to now be her champion. Like,
Yep.
how do you do that? Like,
That's a great question.
Give us an example
Yeah,
of how
so
that looks.
there's people in your career that like the work that you're doing, will sponsor you. I had a gentleman by the name of Bob that I worked a lot with, and when I was in sales, I knew the product inside out. I have an engineering background. I wanted to learn about, but when I would go into customers, they would ask a technical question. They would turn to Bob, and I'm like, I know the answer. So I would say, Bob, you know what? Let me deliver the roadmap of the product. He's like, really? I'm like, yes, let me. He's like, all right. I'm like, I might need your help, so you have to be there to help, this, that. And so he helped me change the mindset of these customers that I actually had the technical background. I've had other meetings too. Another gentleman of mine, great, Carl, he has said, I told him, hey, they're going to put this project up. I've heard they're going to do this project. They're probably going to ask people who they think should be on this project. If they do that, could you put my name in the pot? Okay. So they're friends of mine too. They're professional friends too, that they were sponsors. We would talk about careers and things, and so those people, you have to be safe around it. You can't be just asking anybody. But can you think of a few people that you could ask? Can everyone think of a few people you could ask? And women get more interrupted in meetings, research showed. So if you're in a meeting where you have an idea and it got interrupted and then it comes back around, you can say, hey, thanks for bringing that back up, or I have some more to add to that. Or if you have other people going to the meeting, sometimes you can say, hey, John, I'm going to bring this up. Can you back me up? They generally do. They want to help. They really do. I really rarely meet people that don't want to help. They just don't know how all the time. And so just not being like over aggressive about it, just being conversational, like, can you help me? I think is, yeah? Great, thank you. Easy, great question. We'll talk a little bit. So just to note is women use, and I use this example because I think it's a really easy way. So women use twice as many words on their resume, but only a third of the detail. And if you marry that with women are measured on what they've accomplished, men are measured on what is possible, but we're only giving a third of detail of what we do, we're already starting like 6 steps back. And kind of to your point earlier, Allie, like it's hard to get promoted if people don't know what you do. And if we're waiting to be 100% prepared, which HP did the study I have in there, women wait to 100% to apply to job descriptions, men 60%. So when jobs come up on the docket, if I don't feel 100% prepared, I'm not going to apply. So if you're 60, 70% prepared, most organizations want people, realize they're not 100% prepared for the job. So apply and let them tell you no. They will, I promise. If they don't want you, they're not going to hire you, but don't tell yourself no first. So giving yourself permission to apply, if you have young people going into the workforce, give them the advice too. So I think that's really important. So I'm a big believer in recapping your accomplishments. I talk to a lot of folks about doing this, and I'm going to go back to that question, so don't worry. So there's 3 ways to talk about the work you do. This is in Why Women. Actually, Jeffrey Tobis is based out of Atlanta. He used to work at Coca-Cola. But he writes this awesome book, Why Women, and he says he works with a lot of men of justifying the business for diversity and inclusion, justifying the business reason for diversity and inclusion. And so just thinking about how this may play for you in your role. So I'm just going to give you some examples. Anytime you can use numbers, really important. Anytime you can use numbers, even if you're part of a group. So a woman asks me, well, I'm a part of a group of 4. I don't want to take the numbers. So as a group of 4, this is what we did. This was my area of expertise. So don't be afraid to use numbers. Usually people migrate to numbers, so you want to use numbers any chance you get. And if you can put them associated with these vectors, that seems to be a winning equation for a lot of folks. And even if you're streamlining processes, you don't have to be out there carrying a bag and pushing product. You can just be in the back office streamlining processes. It used to take us 21 days to do this. Now it takes us 7. That is an accomplishment. That saves a lot of money to an organization. And the way that technology is advancing, a lot of back office operations are convoluted and need to be upgraded. So if you're part of those types of processes and those back office, make sure you're discussing them. Make sure you're there discussing them. And don't be afraid if you're working with a product or a company to be a customer champion for them. Oftentimes they want people to do videos of how they're using the products, what's working for them, and it expands your brand too of how you may be showing up in the workplace. So these are the questions I'll show you. These are on page 38, so you don't have to write them down. But these are just high-level questions to ask yourself so that you don't lose track of what you're pushing forward. And I think for many of us, we breeze through projects. Well, we don't breeze through. Most projects are a lot of work, right? But we breeze through it when we're done. We don't document our accomplishments. We don't update maybe some notes to ourselves that we can keep track of for annual reviews or other times of the year you might need to sort of refresh back on what you've accomplished. So anytime you can take a few minutes to just document what you're working on and save it in a folder, it's super powerful. And I even tell women, even keep a list of nice notes you get or things that you get from people in the organization, keep all of those because you want to have data points to refer back to. And I think this is a great, so when I was working on this second book, the gentleman the CEO of my last company, I had called him because I was on that investment team of that nonprofit, and I had a great, super cool technology, this new airspace that had this awesome potential from a technology. So I reached out to my old CEO, who's now at Sequoia, one of the largest VCs in Silicon Valley. And he said he was on a panel and we were talking about it. And he said, JJ, it's so interesting because I just don't know why this happens. And I'm like, what? He goes, I put up a job. He goes, I can remember back to the time I put up a job. It was a vice president job, internal first. He said we had 5 candidates, 4 men, 1 woman. He said 4 of the candidates had somebody stop by my office, send me an email, make a phone call, telling me why I should hire them. The 1 candidate, no one even came. I'm like, that's because we don't know. No one told me I need to have John call you to tell you I should get the job. He's like, what do you mean? That happens all the time. I'm like, no 411. I did not get this message. Did you guys know this? Did anyone know this?
Yes.
You know this. How did you find out?
From male mentors.
Really? Yes. So if you are applying for something in the organization, even though people may or may not know your work, they may ask around, they may not, having someone speak on your behalf is instrumental. 20 years in the workforce, I did not know this. I had no idea. So share the word. Tell your friends over coffee, wine, ask your friends to write for you, but I really think that this kind of stuff, we were never taught the inside baseball of corporate America, and I just some things you just don't know, and I feel like had I known, oh my goodness. So be sure you share. And if you're not a reader, give this book to someone who is, because it is full of tips and tricks that I did not know after 20 years of being in corporate America, and that's just one of them. So anyways, yes, please. What's uncomfortable? Asking for help?
No, it's not asking for help, but asking somebody to reach out to the hiring manager and say you should really, I mean, I don't know, it's uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable for women because we believe our work should speak for itself. And I hear this everywhere. I've had the same syndrome, but when you get to whether you're at the first level or the 6th level of the org chart, this is critical. You have to impact you have to engage your network, you have to align to your sponsors, you have to talk about your accomplishments, not excessively, but enough that other people know what you're working on. And empowering others to help you is a normal activity for men, and if you aspire to get to certain levels, oftentimes you need that little push. So just start in your community. Like if you're part of a nonprofit or if you're part of a religious organization, just have somebody speak up for you for something you want to do. You don't have to start here in corporate America, but just asking people for help. It could be just asking people for help in your home or in your neighborhood. I think all of us need to just get a little more comfortable because we're kind of taught like, hey, I got this, which one, drains us, but 2, doesn't give us the ability to practice. It's hard. I'm not saying this is easy stuff. I'm not saying I have it mastered either. All I'm saying is, hey, look at all the stuff that we don't know. And so that's why I think that accountability well, some of you may know this. I know I did. This accountability partner could be really helpful too. So finding somebody that could kind of say, did you do that yet? Did you do that? Just to sort of keep you going. Because it is hard to keep yourself motivated to ask for help. So I appreciate you asking that.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I guess coming from the sales force, having been in sales, I kind of understand and align what you're thinking is. It's the fact that, my mantra has always been, you have not because you ask not. So, and what's the worst that someone could say is no, and you don't really mean no, you just mean, okay, not now. So I'll just come and ask you a different way later. So it's always been my mantra, regardless of what the situation is, whether, if you don't ask for it, the answer's always going to be no. So. Mm-hmm. So Keisha, can I have my 3,000 points back? No.
Any other thoughts? Does everyone? I have a hard time asking for help in general. It's hard, especially if you're a Type A personality. It's super hard. It's just hard. We're like, I got this. Let me prove to you I can do this. But really, a lot of us are stuck as individual contributors or first-line managers because we haven't been able to form the team around us to help lift us up. And I think there's a lot of people that are willing to help, but we just don't often ask for it. And there's that double, I think it's a double negative, it's hard because women have a hard time being liked and being, yeah. So it's a challenging time for women. Like if you're really a go-getter, then oftentimes people don't like you, and it's a tricky situation for women. I don't understand the psychological standpoint that women can't be liked and aggressive. Like you can't be both. That's kind of yes, it is hard. It is hard. And so finding your own network of people that love you as a person, really enjoy you, and want to help you. And I think a lot of that comes down to the energy that you exude. And so that first book I was telling you about, sometimes you have people in your network that are either dragging you down or telling you you're not good enough or whatever. They're not helping you be the best version of yourself. Sometimes you have to do a self-inventory of the people that are around you. And a lot of times those are at home sometimes, which is tough. So, okay, so could all of you benefit from sharing and accomplish with at least one person? Yeah, and practice at home. Practice with your kids, your nieces, your godchildren, whatever. Practice with people that, you just share something. Did you know I did this at work today? Isn't this great? Like just getting it out there, just getting comfortable hearing your voice say that outside of your head. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, but the thing is, like you're saying, you just assume you're, no, sorry.
This is for the folks on the phone. Here, I'll move around. Okay. There you go.
I think going back to what you were saying when you say you assume you're going to do a good job, so you're going to get promoted, and it doesn't happen, because we all know that. But it's like, and your bosses don't always know what you're doing, so it's like, because you always get these notes, well, it was so helpful that you did this or do that. So I've started like forwarding them to my boss saying, here's a nice note from someone about something. Because I'd never used to do it, just assuming like, somebody's going to tell him I did this. And I just started doing that, and so he has a folder. But going back to that thing where you had the list, because I used to do that before the meeting. I'd have, this is what I'm doing on each of the. But recently he's like, I'm too busy. I don't have time to look at that. So you don't have to do that if it's taking. I just just come and talk to me. He does, because it's like you're saying, when you go at the end of the year, what did I do? I know I did a lot.
Yeah.
So, because that was very helpful. I used to print out those weekly lists or every 2 weeks and then just look, and you're like, whoa.
Exactly. Oh my goodness, I can't believe how much I got done. Yes. I love that. Yes.
I also think there is a component that you have to pay it forward. So if you expect that, the best that you can also do for people is when you do see something that someone has done, it's exactly that. I mean, that's what I like to do, is to recognize, let's say someone I see has done like a really nice job on a task or something. I'm not waiting for that person, to ask me. I just kind of look at it and say, well, I would have maybe liked to receive that if I was in that situation. So that's what I mean by paying forward. So getting used to that. And I love how you used that terminology a couple of times. I think the universe just kind of,
Yes, I love that. So you send an email to their boss and say, hey,
that's what I do. I just find out who's, they're reporting to, and I'll send an email. And I mean it, but not waiting it just because I know that those are the kind of things that eventually, if you've done the same thing, it'll, like you said, the universe will take care of itself and you'll get those same back. So it's nice to do that.
I think that's so nice too. And are you good at receiving too?
Yes.
Are you good at, you are, okay. Yeah. I meet a lot of women that are awesome at giving, but not always is receiving. And like, even if you say, hey, you look at, oh, well, this is not, oh, I don't like this, oh, this does not, this zipper's broke. They'll tell me 16 things wrong with their clothes. I'm like, I just said I like your dress, and they tell me all the reasons why I shouldn't like it. I was like, okay, I still like your dress. So, and the sorries, making sure, I'm sure you guys have read about this, but you don't want to inject yourself in meetings with an apology. Oh, excuse me, can I just, hey, sorry, I wanted to add. You got to zip it. And if you're in meetings with another woman that did that, you pull that woman into the bathroom and you say, just say your point. Because you can knock down your point before you even get started. You guys have talked about this? Yeah, so making sure that your delivery is as strong as you are and that you're not apologizing for contributing. Because people see you then as not as equal because you really don't feel like you should be at the table. And if you're in a conference room, not sitting on the outskirts, like sit down and spread out, right? There's that whole psychology. My water bottle, my notebook, make your space. There's a lot to it. I can't believe all this stuff is going on. I just went to work and did my job. But then if you do want to get promoted, and like I said, not all women want to get promoted, and that is fine too, but if you want to get on a board or you want to start an initiative, like you have to ask for help. You have to get to the right people. So just making sure that not only are you in it, but you're working on it too in parallel. And it takes time. I tell women who call me like, well, I got to get out of this. I have to do something. It's 9 to 12 months. 9 to 12 months it takes, especially if you have 15 years experience or more. It takes a while unless you just happen to get super lucky, which some people do. But if you are trying to get on a board, if you're trying to get into a different P&L, if you're trying to expand your impact, 9 to 12 months at a minimum. So just thinking about that. Okay, so I know I could talk for like till 4 straight. So okay, so a couple things I just want to talk about is no surprise women take fewer risks than men. Okay, because we wait till 100% we're ready. But it also takes us, that plays into what the woman from Evolve says, that talks about we make less money. It talks about how we get promoted because we're constantly waiting to be 100% prepared because we don't want to let people down. So really thinking about how are you going to stretch in 2020 in a new way, even if you're not 100% prepared. What are you going to do to get there? Because I really like to focus on stretch projects that are going to give me the relevance to make that bridge for where I want to have impact next. So what is that stretch project? So in the back of the book I created, I'll show you this quickly, because I think this is eye-opening. They had to do a study to show that men get better projects than women. Okay, on to the projects. Okay, so this project chart is on 137. I made this because I made this for both sides. So I have a lot of executives that are trying to give top talent new opportunities, and I also have a lot of top talent that are trying to create relevance for where they want to have impact next. And so this chart on 137, which I'll go through, is awesome because it allows you to see how you're showing up in all your projects. Because for a lot of women that I work with, they often do the same task across 5 or 6 projects. And so they're not expanding the opportunity to build their skill set, they're not expanding their network, they're not expanding the opportunities at work to really create some momentum. So just think about what projects you're working on, and also what projects do you need to sort of align with in the next year or two to give you those opportunities to expand your brand, maybe give you additional skills, and even build out your network. So you can add to this. I did this all in Excel. I'm happy to send you this chart too. But basically, does it align to where you are, where you want to go? What is the impact to the company? So what numbers can you associate with this project so that you can discuss them or put them on your profile or something, okay? What's the benefit to your customer? This is really big for companies because oftentimes projects then roll back to the external impact. How much executive visibility? The study I just blew through real quickly says men get more executive visibility options than women. So making sure you have some sort of executive visibility. So whether you present your own data, it could be just 1 layer up, it could be 5 layers up, depending if you're on a special group in the organization. But what visibility? Do people know you're here, what you're working on, what is possible? And sometimes taking special projects off the side of your desk really give you those access points that you might not get in your day job, okay? P&L is huge. So many boards that I talk to, so many executives say women have no P&L experience. How many of you pay the bills at home? I'm like, most women I know have P&L experience, but we don't talk about it. So making sure you know whatever project you're working on, what is the overall budget? How much of the budget did your group use? Were you under budget? What is the impact to the project you're working on, to the marketplace? Just get familiar with P&L because people will ask you about it and they just assume women don't have P&L experience, which is ridiculous just based on the hands in this room. So just making sure you know what your P&L experience is per project. Is this something you've done over and over, or is this a stretch project for you? Do you enjoy it? Right? And when does it hit? I'm a big believer on past experience not to have all my projects hit in the same month. Bad idea. But this is great too, even for your mentees. If you're mentoring people, this is great for them to just know what they're working on. It's great to just know what are you doing. How many of you have multiple projects? I'm assuming most of you. So it's just good to kind of know what are you doing. And more importantly, what do you want to ask for? Do you get those opportunities where your people in your network or even people in your org chart say, well, what do you want to work on in 2020? Or what's a project? Which of these projects would be important? When people ask me that, I really didn't have a game plan. I just did, well, I guess I'll do that now. This at least gives me an organized plan to say, okay, what am I missing? What do I need? What would be helpful? What's a stretch project for me? And make it more, I would say make it more strategic than I've made it in the past. Okay? Yes. I think you have the mic right there, yeah.
Yeah, well, you know what you're working on and what's going on in your group, and so what kind of projects you can have around you, but how do you find the ones that are above your head where you might find executive exposure in that? Because a lot of times those are discussed above you and you're not included, so you don't know about them until initiative comes out.
Yep.
And like there's been things that have come out and said, oh, I'll volunteer on this, but you don't know about it ahead of time to say, I want to do this. So how do you find
That's a great
about
question.
things?
That's where other people have that too. They just know either it's posted or you hear about it after it's posted or it's already taken. So that's where sponsors come in big. And I think women are not big on sponsors. It's my next section to close on is the sponsorship. But first asking your boss. And not everyone has a boss that's a champion. Not everyone has a boss that's a sponsor. So if you're in that situation, you have to be more strategic in getting other people. And I think for those of you that are working on projects that cross multiple disciplines or departments, sometimes I send my weekly update to multiple people, right? People that I'm like, oh, I'm working. One time I was in charge. I did eventually get that cloud job, by the way, 12 months later. And I was very diligent, and I talk all about how I got from the no to the yes. But in doing so, they wanted me to move to California. I couldn't do that, so they hired a gentleman over the top of me. That gentleman was wonderful, he would take all of my rolled up opportunities and present them as the team. And the team was him and me. That wasn't even proper English. We were the team. And he would take all this and roll it up. So I got strategic to let other people, so I was sort of the focal point for the product team, the marketing team, the sales team. And so I would send my weekly roll up to 6 or 7 people. He was a senior director at the time. So 6 or 7 people, I would send it to all of them. And then he came to me and said, stop doing that. I did not. I just kept sending it every Friday. And the great thing was it helped keep building my brand, and it did not allow him to take credit for the work I was doing. I'm like, over my dead body. Yeah, glad this is being recorded. But I had to get strategic to get out and get other people to know about my work. So that's one way, is how do you let other people know about your work? But then also, if you have a great boss, which a lot of times I did have had a great boss, I say, hey, I'd love to work on something like this next, because this is a skill set I'm looking to grow, or this is what I've really enjoyed. And that person has actually brought opportunities back to me. But then the next opportunity is to have, let me just go forward. Different things. So the next opportunity is really to engage career catalysts, and these may or may not be your boss. So the 3 that I really focus on, and there's a lot of them, you can read all about different types. The 3 that I really have been instrumental in my career is a coach. Coaches are great people to get your story straight, get your data straight before you have opportunities to meet with people in the organization. Sometimes we just have to vet it out with somebody. You don't want to vet it out with your boss. You don't want to vet it out, especially with your significant other. Like, you need somebody that has executive experience that can help you get your ducks in a row, and paying for that is worth it. I've hired probably 6, 7 coaches. You have a coach, yeah.
Just a plug, we have an internal coaching program that is not getting enough action.
Did you guys know this?
No.
Will you talk a little bit about it, just so they know? Yeah.
So I'd said we have an internal coaching program here in the U.S. and actually in Europe as well. There's been people across the organization who've gone through training to become certified and take advantage of this. And we've communicated in various ways. There's more we can do to promote it. We need more people interested in taking.
So let me ask you, what is a good candidate? Like, can you describe, like, what is a good person to leverage the coaching service?
You know,
like, you should use a coach when?
Like when you are stuck on a project while you're trying to build your, maybe go into a new role or work on your overall development, things like that.
Great. Yeah. Not all companies have this. I'm telling you, this is fantastic. So if you're, yep, go ahead.
You could talk to your talent partner, or Scott Schnoop is the head of the program.
Thanks, Joe. Yep. Yeah, so it's great to sort things out, because as a lead, I've managed many teams, and I love all the people I've managed, but sometimes they come in your office and they just lay it all out on the table, and I'm sort of thinking, yeah, and I've done that too in my career, because no one really said, like, hey, you got to get your ducks in a row before you have small opportunities with your boss or your boss's boss. And I think having a coach to talk things through and get your plan together is super helpful, and it doesn't, like, ding your brand. Like, sometimes you just have to be conscious of the brand that you're building and take your conversation out and then bring it back in when you're more prepared.
Is a coach a paid version of a mentor?
So that's a great question, because coaches, for me, the way I look at it is, coaches for me is like somebody, like, if you think of you're trying to get athletic shape, like, they kind of say do these exercises, and they kind of put a strategy together of how to move through your exercises so that you're benefiting. And a mentor, and I'll talk about this in a second, is a little more on, like, kind of talks about what they need to talk about when they're with you, but when the meeting's done, then the conversation is done. A coach is thinking strategically about where have you been, what do you want to do, what do you have to do first, second, and third, and helps move you through the process. A lot of times you have to go in to come out, you know what I mean? It could get deep, but it also could be very strategic, and hey, have you thought of this and you've thought of that? Because they talk to people about their careers all the time. And it's great to just really sort that out first before you go back to your manager. Like I always say, don't go to your manager trying to figure something out sometimes, like in regards to your career. Try to get that figured out on your own so that when you do go to a manager, you have some suggestions of things you could do to sort of get the level of impact or the relevance you desire. You have anything to add to that?
I mean, I think for me, coaches are about helping you discover things for yourself. They're not there to solve your problem, because with coaching, we already with coaching, we already assume that you're creative, resourceful, and whole as an individual, which means that your ability to solve your own problems, you already have that within you. And what a coach does is help you to discover that, if that makes any sense. And then a mentor, to me, is more about, they leverage their own experiences to help provide advice, to guide you. And it could be a one and done thing, like JJ said, or it could be an ongoing relationship where you reach out to a mentor because you have this situation that's occurring, you want feedback on how to handle it, or you're thinking you had a conflict or whatever. It's a little bit more directive, if you will, versus coaching, which is a lot more introspective. Like, coaches will help you to dig down deep within yourself to really uncover things that you may not have even known existed. So, I mean, that's my...
Maybe a way you're holding yourself back, or how you show up, or what you thought, like your own self barriers.
Yeah.
Do you want to say?
I think
Yeah.
Stephanie said it great.
You did. You did a great job.
I did my work.
You did your work.
Well, I'm going through the process of becoming a coach.
Oh, that's awesome.
So it was definitely and you go through like an awakening sort of discovery, and I have a coach now too. So it's a lot, it takes a lot of energy. For me, it does. It takes a lot of energy. Mentors is like, to me, that's easy. Coaching is, I thought I was a coach until I went to the actual training, and I was like, that's not what I'm really doing.
And like, the way I think about mentors, like, say you have to get something approved in another group. A mentor might say, well, this person really likes you to show up this way, or generally you have to check these 3 boxes before they'll approve it. A mentor, I always see as sort of has an inside track or advice or suggestions on people ways to get things done. So generally mentors are in the group in which you are trying to make progress. Where coaches could be in the corporate, which would be great, because not all corporations pay for that, so that is a really benefit to employees. And sometimes you have to go out and just buy them, pay for them yourself. And I would say if you're going to hire a coach, I have a couple of things, but don't ever pay all up front. Like, I always do it by milestones. I did one time up front, big mistake, huge mistake. So I have advice on how to hire coaches if you do have to go outside. But if there's a coach, I mean, for those of you that have big plans for 2020, it's great to just sort it out with somebody. And then finally, the ones that I think is the challenging. So the Glass Hammer and Accenture wrote a white paper on women in tech. But to me, it applies to all women, is women struggle with sponsors. Sponsors are people that not only just give you advice, but they leverage their social capital for your goals. So they open a door for you, they put you on a short list, they send a connection to somebody to have lunch or a coffee meeting with. Sponsors are really strategic. They're often higher up than you are because they have more access. They could be in your partners, they could be in your customers, they could be in the community. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And I found this to be just a really big opportunity for women because it's something we're not really pursuing. So much so that I wrote about 4 chapters on this because I get so many questions on how do you find a sponsor. And it really comes down to your point, Stephanie, is you have to figure out where you want to go. So, I used to talk about sponsors, and a lot of people would be like, oh my gosh, they come up at the end, they're like, oh my gosh, this is so great, will you be my sponsor? Which was very flattering. But generally, I'm not in circles they need to be in. I'm not opening doors in, Tallahassee or in DC. You have to find sponsors that are in circles of either where you are or where you want to be to get you to that next level. And so not only do you have to know what your goals are, you have to identify who could be your sponsor. And just like anything else, not everybody's going to want to be your sponsor. Sometimes it takes some time. And I have very specific steps in the book of how to create opportunities to find the sponsors to help you make your goals a reality. And that's really what you're looking to do. And even if it's a long-term goal, 5 years from now, you can still work on people to help pave the way to make that happen. And then in creating opportunities to connect. And I think sometimes I know when I was in sales, I really wanted to get into National City, which was since bought by PNC. They would always say, no, no, no. My boss you have to get in that account, you have to get in that account. So I found out where, not the CIO, but the director of IT, the boards that he was on. I researched the boards he was on. Then I found the events of those boards. So he was on the CIO council, he was on another IT thing. I would buy tickets to go to those events just so I could sit next to him. And it took me a while, but I finally had an opportunity where I went to an event. It kind of worked out because I was in IT. I went to IT events. But I looked up his face, I looked up his background, and then one conference I actually ended up sitting next to him. And he's like, oh, nice to meet you. I'm like, oh, yeah, like very strategic. So at the meeting, he said, oh, you know, what do you do? I'm with the software company. And he said, oh, I'd love to learn more about that. I said, oh, great. How do I get your schedule? He's like, oh, you can call my assistant. Oh, what's her name? So as I'm walking out of the event, I call his assistant. I'm like, oh, I was just with John. I'm just calling to make an appointment, this and that. So, you know, figuring out strategic ways sometimes to get to people. I did get a $2 million deal on there. Super excited. It took me like 36 months, I think, from the time I was tasked to do it till the time we got it done. But I think figuring out creative ways to connect with people that can open doors for you is super important. We can be a little strategic if we want to, I know it. So that's kind of things. I think just ending, like a lot of people say, how do I spot my sponsors? So I'm just going to pop these out. These are also on page 155, but I like this because it's kind of to your point earlier too, is you've got to find the right people. And not everybody does understand the process, right? There's not everyone's givers, not everyone's, you know, and as you mentioned earlier, like the more you do it, the energy you put out there comes back to you. So these are just some of the things. I definitely was not able to capture everything, but hopefully I gave you enough nuggets, enough pages. I think you can tell from the table of contents, there's a lot more in the book, and I really tried hard not to put anything, I really did not put anything in here that I already knew. I wanted to really put just the data that I thought would be instrumental, not only to myself, but all the women behind me, in front of me, next to me. And I read about 3,000 articles for this book, and I put over 200 in here. So hopefully you'll use it as a tool and just pick the chapters that relate to you. And these are great, just picking a chapter and discussing it over lunch, or even sharing it with the women that are coming into the workforce now. So thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate it.
JJ, and thank everyone who joined us on the live stream. We're going to turn off the live stream now, but again, please fill out the survey, and we are going to do our best to get books to those who joined remotely as well. For those in the room, we've got a little bit more time, and we're going to do some breakout discussions at our tables. Thanks.